Okay, now let's take a look at security awareness training and why organizations need to ensure that their employees understand what cyber threats and cyber attacks look like. So essentially, cyber attackers don't just rely on technology to get around security controls. Many use social engineering, as we've seen in the previous presentation, to deceive users into unintentionally creating that entry point into the networks so that malicious software can take control. So constantly being targeted, people always have the ability to be that weakest link in your security defenses. However, our people can also be our strongest line of defense, armed with the right knowledge. So threats are constantly changing, and we need to adapt to those changes to remain protected. So end users and employees who have been trained on how to spot cyber threats can be a significant asset to your business's cybersecurity approach. So let's take a look at why we need security awareness training. And here's just some of the statistics that have been presented within a couple reports. As you can see, Verizon's data breach investigations report found that 82% of all successful cyber attacks is caused by human error. Okay, 82%. That is a staggering percentage. And also too, from Proofpoint's State of the Fish report, 83% of organizations are victims of phishing attacks. Okay, and it's estimated that there are about 3.4 billion spam emails sent every day, and on a daily basis, Google actually blocks about 100 million phishing emails. So as I mentioned earlier, your employees, your customers are constant targets whenever they are connected to the internet. Here's some more information drawn from WebRoot. So 50% of users in the survey admit to clicking links to messages from unknown senders. Okay, so they've received an email in their inbox. They have no idea who that individual is, but they've still clicked on a link within that email or that message. Um, and 74% of those attacks were via email, which beggars the point why um, business email compromise as well as email account takeover is so significant. And so the key takeaway here is office workers, we underestimate the risks out there. And partially that's due to education. So what are the consequences to business if users aren't able to detect these particular threats and they click on those links? Well, here are some of the world's most expensive phishing attacks. The first at the top you can see is Facebook and Google. So essentially, fake invoice emails cost Google and Facebook 90 million pounds when euros, sorry, when a man actually was able to dupe Google and Facebook into transferring over $100,000 into accounts he controlled, and he'd pleaded guilty to wire fraud. Secondly, we've got Creelan Bank, which fell victim to CEO fraud, and they lost, as you can see, 76 million euros. And also, too, we can see at the bottom a successful social engineering scam on FACC, which is a global aerospace company, cost them 42 million euros. So here, the CEO's email address was infiltrated and then used to dupe a lower level employee, or employees, I should say, into transferring huge sums of money to a dodgy, suspicious bank account. So those are the big stories, but we also have, as you can see on the right, some smaller examples, I should say, from the SMB space. Okay, so 20 million annual revenue company, food distributor, they lost $23,000. And at the bottom here, a 4 to 5 million revenue company had to part way with $500,000. So uh, if you think about small businesses, can they truly survive with these types of losses? Large organizations, government-backed entities, they've got a foot to stand on and backing, but small businesses, not so much. So even the FBI's reporting underscores this particular point that this is a billion-dollar industry. Business email compromise and account takeover is very lucrative. So let's take a look at social engineering and what that really is. So let's watch this short video to fully understand what social engineering is.
In cybersecurity, social engineering refers to a wide array of tactics that can be used to trick you into opening a malicious email attachment, clicking on an unsafe URL, or sending money or valuable information to an attacker. It's the art and science of manipulation. Attackers use any information they can grab from your social networks and use your basic human nature against you. By playing off deep-rooted impulses, such as fear, desire, and empathy, the attacker hijacks your normal thought process to make you act on their behalf. Social engineering against your organization can lead to credential phishing, wire fraud, and more. It's often combined with other techniques, such as email domain spoofing, where fraudsters send emails from a trusted domain. So, how can you avoid a socially engineered attack? Here are a few tips. Slow down. They are relying on you to act impulsively, without thinking. Be suspicious of anything that came unsolicited or is unexpected, even if it appears to come from a trusted website, coworker, or even your boss. Don't click on links in emails. If it appears to come from a trusted site, go to the actual site to check your information. Stopping socially engineered attacks requires a cyber defense centered on people, not technology. That includes stopping attacks from reaching their targets and training people to recognize and report any attempts that get through. Learn more at proofpoint.com.
Okay, so I hope you found that short video quite useful. So let's take a look at essentially what a phishing attack does look like. And we're going to walk through that anatomy of a phishing attack. So firstly, obviously, we need a hacker who is going to try to target the intended victim. So firstly, they will send that phishing email to the target. That user unintentionally clicks on a link that's a phishing link and takes them to a fake website, a phishing website. From that phishing website, the hacker is then able to collect the important information that you provided, which could be your username and password or anything else. And once they've got that, the hacker is then able to use the victim's credentials to access further private information. Often this occurs without the user being aware that this has actually taken place. Okay. So what are some of the types of phishing? Let's walk through some common examples. Firstly, we have whale phishing. So a whaling attack is a phishing attack that targets a senior executive within the organization. So these individuals often have, deep access to sensitive areas of the network. So a successful attack can result in access to valuable information or data. Next, we've got spear phishing. So spear phishing is different in the sense that this is where most phishing attacks would cast a wide net. Okay. But spear phishing is highly targeted. So well-researched attackers generally focus on business execs, public personas, and other lucrative targets. Next, we have vishing, which is of particular interest given the significant news around AI. So vishing is voice phishing. So it involves a malicious caller purporting to be from tech support, for example, a government agency or another organization, and trying to extract personal information such as banking or credit card information. Smishing. So smishing is SMS-enabled phishing that is delivered through malicious short links to smartphone users. They're often disguised as account notices, price notifications, and political messages. I've also seen some as well too. I've received related to COVID-19 and the NHS's track and trace service. Another way in which hackers can use nefarious methods is through QR code phishing. So this is where, a message is sent or an email that includes a QR code that, when it's scanned, leads to a fake website or downloads malware onto the user's device. So users have to be clued up to the new threats that we're seeing. And one that's pretty recent as well too is phishing as a service. So I mentioned evil proxy in a previous presentation. And essentially, this is where the phishing as a service uses a software as a service business model, providing access to phishing kits in exchange for a fee. So the cybercriminals are essentially service providers selling access to tools and knowledge necessary to carry out a phishing attack. So what do you get with security awareness training? Generally, you would get a phishing simulator, which is going to be used, as you can see, to build that awareness, test those users. So a great solution would enable you to be able to actually craft those emails, those phishing emails, with the ability to customize them as well too, so they look pretty legit to a user. You can also to create the lure page, which would be that page where the user would potentially enter their credentials that are then captured. And these particular simulators need to be as close to real world examples as possible to make it more compelling. Security awareness training would also include access to training courses. So the great solutions out there have a pretty extensive library. Those libraries are also well updated regularly with any new content, and you can either have the user go directly to training, or as part of the phishing simulation, once they've clicked the link, for example, you can have them to you can have them redirected to take a training course, for example. And in terms of automation, this is where you're going to have the ability using the security awareness training to actually manage that phishing campaign. So you can actually see when users click on the links, what percent of users actually clicked on a link or actually opened the email, read it. Did they take any further action? So you can pretty much gauge the interaction of your users as with respect to the phishing emails. So let's have a little game. Can you spot the fish in this example? Let's test our knowledge of phishing. So as you can see here, you can access the game via phishingquiz.withgoogle.com. Let's just take a couple quick examples. All right, so we've got Joe. Just enter my email address and get started. So all right, let's start with this Google Doc. Okay, be sure to check out link URLs, hover over them for a while and explore the email addresses. So let's try this one from Luke Johnson. So Luke Johnson looks a bit suspicious. There's an A missing. If I hover over this link, it takes me to drive-google.com domain. I'm not too convinced about that. It looks close to Google Drive, but not quite. So I'm going to say this is a phishing email. Yep, it is a phishing email. Okay. So there was a lookalike URL within that one. So mousing over this link would show that there's an imitation domain to drive -- Google. Let's try one more. You've received a fax. We know you're excited, but take your time. All right, let's check the email address. So no reply at efacks.com. Let's hover over this link. And it seems like the start of the domain is different to the email address. And also the end of the domain includes mailru382.co. I'm going to say this is phishing. This is a bit suspicious. So well spotted. All right. So the sender's address is efacks.com, which is misspelt. And as you can see here, the actual domain is mailru382.co.uk. So when you do get a chance, please have a go at that quiz. So what does a successful security awareness training look like? So here's some information collected from Rebroot, which shows that regular phishing simulations can actually reduce those clicks. So users are actually learning to better spot phishing emails. And so they are not clicking on those emails or links because they understand that they are suspicious. And just like with any process, it's a continuous, ongoing management process. So you would benefit from routinely, you know, testing or sending out these phishing campaigns to your users. And essentially, what that means is, with the right training, with the right knowledge, you actually get a reduction in the amount of malware that actually hits your business. This is a very important topic here in Europe. And let's try to get an understanding why this should be important for every business owner. So as we are aware with you know, the fallout from the COVID pandemic, as well as just the direction in which, you know, technology is going, your business is more interconnected. Okay, so there's more data for you to manage. Most of that is outside of your control, whether it's in a SaaS application, it's in the cloud, it's third-party information from suppliers and vendors. If it's devices, for example, IoT devices, your users on the move, there's lots more data that's passing around that you don't have control. So the important thing here is to underscore that the, you know, bad guys are running a business just like yourself, and they are looking to streamline the operations and get a hold of your sensitive data. So let's speak about some of the principles of data privacy. So there are four key principles. Those principles essentially ensure that there's fair and authorized processing of personally identifiable information. Fair in the sense that, as you can see from the blurb, that that data must not be processed in a way that's misleading, that's dodgy, essentially from the end user's perspective. It must be authorized, so you must have the permission of the user to actually access that data. And when you are processing that data, you have to ensure that you have that custody of care with that data, as long as that data is of any significant value to yourself. And at the end of that life cycle, that data needs to be destroyed. And also to make sure that any data that's attributed to an individual is well protected. Okay. So why is this important? Why data privacy? A few reasons, and they're quite, I guess, evident. One of those is that data is a very valuable target for criminals. So as I'd seen in previous, shown, sorry, in previous slides, it's a big business, $1 billion business, and essentially the key thing to take away is that um, your data in of itself isn't valuable. It's the worth of that data to you and the lengths you would go to get that data back that makes it so important. And the criminals know this, and that's why they are targeting businesses heavily for that data. The implications as well too, and why privacy is important, is if data is lost for your customers or your employees, there could be severe consequences, whether it's reputational, where once that bad news gets out, you've got a bad publicity or press, you will end up losing customers, losing that standing within the industry. But also too, there are massive penalties if you are actually found to have been in contravention of the laws of the governance around protecting data. And so uh, data privacy is important because it goes quite in sync or in alignment with cybersecurity practices, as well as data protection related to sensitive data. And so let's take a look at some of the risk to data that we need to be aware of. So firstly, you have those cybersecurity risks. So these are associated with technology-related incidents that might impact the availability, the integrity, or the confidentiality of, you know, software, hardware, and related processes. So they must be configured and secured properly to minimize that type of risk. Another type is privacy risk. So this is when personal information falls into the hands of unauthorized individuals, and the victims may experience problems ranging from, you know, dignity type effects such as embarrassment, stigma, to maybe more tangible harm such as discrimination, economic loss, physical harm, for example. So sources of privacy risk include non-technological factors such as conversation, and paper document disposal. So these two types of risk actually feed into what are called cybersecurity related privacy events. So that's where there's a failure of both the cybersecurity and privacy measures, which result in data breaches. And so to protect privacy, you need to control how data is being used across the data lifecycle, which means as an organization, you need policies to ensure data privacy and security. For example, correctly identifying sensitive data, both for the organization as well as personal. You need to ensure that there are secure methods in place to protect that data, and it's only accessed by authorized personnel. And here are some numbers around, what the implications from a financial perspective could be if you're not in alignment with the regulation. So as you can see, this is from GDPR. So GDPR applies to businesses that offer goods to or services to EU residents, but also to, if you monitor the behavior of users inside the EU, you need to be aligned with GDPR. And so if you are found to be in contravention of these particular articles, you could be facing a fine of, if it's UK GDPR, around 20 million euros, or 4% of your annual global turnover. So the key takeaway is privacy has changed the landscape, and it continues to do so. And these laws are transportable, so they apply to you if you do business in other countries. Okay, so there has to be a habit of joining towards a common consensus within this particular space. So we're talking about personal data and privacy. So what is personal data? So under GDPR, personal data is any information that relates to a living person who can be directly or indirectly identified using that information. So here are some common examples: name, home address, email address, phone number, identification card number, passport number, for example. So those are direct examples of personal data, but also these that are on the screen now, they can be considered personal data based on other information associated with these types of data. So for example, location data, if you're captured on CCTV and there's other data that a bad actor has of yourself, that can be used to personally identify yourself. Okay. So when we speak about personal data, there's some key things to understand from a GDPR perspective. So the key principles around the privacy of that data, there are 7 key principles. The first one is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So essentially, your business, your organization needs to ensure that data collection practices don't break the law, and that you aren't hiding anything from the data subjects. So state in your privacy policy the type of data you're collecting and the reason you are collecting it. The second principle is purpose limitation. So this is where organizations, your business, you should only collect personal data for a specific purpose and clearly state what that purpose is, and only collect data for as long as necessary to complete that purpose. Third principle, data minimization, or King's speech. So this is where you must only process the personal data that is needed to achieve its processing purpose. So doing so has 2 major benefits. First, in the event of a data breach, the unauthorized individual will only have access to a limited amount of data. And secondly, data minimization makes it easier to keep data accurate and up to date. Okay, which leads to the fourth, which is accuracy. So the accuracy of personal data is integral to data protection. So GDPR states that every reasonable step must be taken to erase or rectify data that is inaccurate or incomplete. And individuals actually do have the right to request that inaccurate or incomplete data be erased or rectified within 30 days. Storage limitation. So similarly, you need to delete personal data when it's no longer necessary. And the sixth principle, as you can see here, is integrity and confidentiality. So this is the only principle that actually deals explicitly with security. So GDPR states that personal data must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data. Um, and that includes protection against unauthorized processing, but also to accidental loss, damage, destruction, and so forth. And the last principle, which is quite key as well, is accountability. So by achieving accountability, you're going to demonstrate that you have the necessary documentation to prove that you are meeting the compliance requirements. And so under GDPR as well, we need to be aware that users have their rights that are enshrined in law. So essentially, these user rights, as you can see, are designed to determine that those we trust with our data, they use it in a way that is fair and reasonable. There is an issue here, though. While you may look after data in a trustworthy way, what happens if your company is compromised by a threat actor? And so we need to have a new conversation speaking about who owns the data in your network. We call that the data responsibility pie. So let's start with the data owner. So the data owner or the data controller, eventually if that data is leaked, then ultimately you will have that responsibility as the data owner. The second piece of the pie is the information technology team or the data processor. Typically, normally this is your MSP. So essentially who you trust to provide the technology and the infrastructure that the data resides on. And lastly, we've got the info security team or the data processor. Um, Typically can be your MSP as well too. And the info security team is going to inform the data owner on how they can better secure the data, usually with upgraded technology and services that information technology team will manage. So ultimately, it will be the data owner that makes the decisions on what measures will be in place and sets the budget allocated to do so. So essentially, from a privacy perspective, it's all about making sure that you've got the data protection controls in place to ensure privacy. So it's about a multi-layered approach. Here's just some examples of some of those layers you can use to make sure that you're protecting data, ensuring the privacy of the data as well to personal data, and making sure that you are in a line with the compliance requirements, for example, GDPR. For the majority of the webinar, I was focused on the threat landscape and how you can protect yourself against bad actors and certain threats out there. But let's start talking about, when an incident has actually occurred, how do you respond to that? How do you manage that particular situation? And the thing is, severe security incidents will happen eventually. So it's not a question of if, but when. And so my question to the audience is, are you prepared for that inevitable worst case scenario? We spoke about the common business risks such as natural disasters, and I'm pretty confident that, should there be a major fire or flood, most businesses have a plan in place and the staff have been routinely trained on how to respond and recover from that event. But are you doing the same for cybersecurity incidents? If you're not, here's why you should. So the statistics are quite telling in terms of the impact from cyber incidents. Um, as you can see from the first entry there, only 8% of businesses that pay ransom get all their data back in return, and that's from a Sophos study. So essentially, 8 of 100 businesses that pay the ransom actually get all the data back. So what we're saying is, you know, 50, 60% of data being returned to the organizations is more common, and that still leaves you open to liability from a regulatory perspective, but also to further attacks by the bad actors. And so we've seen some of these statistics before. 1.4 million average recovery costs. Ransomware is only 20%. That means 80% of your cost is actually dealing with that attack. So even if you do pay the ransom, that's only 20% of the distance. You've got, for the time, effort, man hours, and actually responding to that threat. And as you can see here, average downtime 21 days. So what would an hour of downtime cost your business? Is that 50? Is that, 50 pounds? Is that 5,000, 10,000, 50K, even more? And what would be the impact to your business if you're down for 3 weeks or more? So some of the examples that I previously covered, some of the organizations were down for a month, sometimes even two. And statistics show that most companies that have had a cyber reported or related incident, SMBs particularly, they don't survive beyond 6 months. And so incident response is quite critical. And what I want to do is introduce a concept left and right of boom. So we'll start with this timeline at the bottom, which includes those three pillars of cybersecurity as well as business, which is technology, people, and process. And as we progress from left to right, you will see that uh, the dependence on technology wanes significantly, but the reliance on people increases remarkably the further into the process we are. So left of boom is essentially before the incident. So as you can see, everyone's high-fiving, business is doing well, there are no concerns, no issues. But when that boom incident does occur, ransomware, what the case may be, everything to the right is how you actually respond to that. And it's pretty involved when you think about what's involved in ransomware attacks. So, you know, when you get that message from the threat actor saying, hey, your files are encrypted, or you've got, 1, 2, 3 days to pay the ransom, or I'm going to publish all of this on the internet, have you given thought to how you would handle that situation? If that occurred now, are you prepared to deal with that particular situation? If you think about Royal Mail as well, too, they had to very quickly after the breach, put out this message on Twitter saying, "Hey, we are temporarily unable to dispatch items to overseas destinations. Please do not post any export items." And so, are you, do you have a plan in place in terms of, how you communicate with the media? How do you communicate internally to the employees so that they know what they should and shouldn't say, for example, or potentially panic and leak information, which could damage your reputation? What about your customers? Okay, have you got a robust plan in place so that you can deal with those irritated customers who, expect essentially the problem to resolve instantaneously? And so if you don't have the right approach in place, you can easily make rush decisions that will result in costly missteps. If you don't have the right incident response tools, then you wouldn't have that visibility and understanding of the incident, which is then going to slow down the resolution of the issue. And so when you think about incident response is there to, as you see, the goal of it is to minimize the impact of that attack, offer rapid recovery from the incident, and also to limit that interruption to the organization. Now, most MSPs generally have an incident response plan in place to cope with any disruption. But most SMBs, to the contrary, are ill-equipped to either craft or respond to an incident in a timely manner. And so, let's have a chat about what an incident response life cycle looks like and why it's so important. So, firstly, it starts with preparation and planning. So, preparing is one of the most important and essential incident response activities that can be undertaken. So, essentially, this is where you are prepared to respond to the worst things that can happen to your business. And preparation is key to the survival of your business and involves investing work in identifying the start of an incident, how to recover, how to get everything back to normal, and how to create and establish security policies. Next, we've got the detect and analysis phase. So this is where, you've got this team that's going to analyze the symptoms, those indicators of compromise that might identify an incident and then determining whether systems or data has been breached. So in order to stop an incident, you first need to detect and identify any irregular indicators of activity within the environment. From there, you've got containment, eradication, and recovery. So containment is going to encompass any number of actions you take after the initial investigation of the incident to stop the spread and understand the method of attack. Your eradication after the containment, further eradication efforts are often required in order to completely remove the underlying components of the incident and to mitigate any identified vulnerabilities that were exposed during the incident. And your recovery obviously is key as well. So this is where you need to have implemented a recovery process to restore and return any compromised hosts, applications, and networks, getting them back up and running as normal. So this might have to include, rebuilding infected systems, replacing compromised files, resetting passwords, patching system, network security as well too. And finally, post-incident activity. So this is actually an essential part of responding to a cybersecurity incident, and that is to document, communicate, and build upon the learned lessons. So this step is going to provide, an opportunity, excuse me, to have those conversations with key stakeholders and the workforce to, reflect on the overall experience and learn from the situation to better respond to future security events. Um, and so, fortunately, Leaf IT is able to provide incident response services that's going to allow for that 24/7, 365 protection for worst case security scenarios. So, what that means is, as you can see on the screen, that's direct access to expert incident response analysts. It means there's real time management and guidance to contain and remediate those worst case incidents. And it means that we've got the recovery procedures that will determine the extent of that compromise, gain insight into that process and the tactics, and then help you to be able to better defend your business. And lastly, having those post-incident reports and recommendations. So there's actually a 30-day post-incident monitoring of the environments to prevent further reinfection. So Leaf IT's incident response service is going to be able to minimize the impact of the cyber attack. It's going to offer rapid recovery, and it's going to limit the business interruption or loss so that your business continues to thrive in the face of adversity. And with that, I want to thank you very much for attending and participating in this webinar, and I hope you've found the information extremely useful.